What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus and the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus, we're getting a really large 6.95-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 386, and a 20.5 by 9 aspect ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we're getting a 6.4-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution as well, a PPI of 411, and a 20 by 9 aspect ratio. So probably the most obvious difference here is that with the Celero 5G Plus at 6.95 inches versus 6.4 with the A33 5G, the Boost Mobile is clearly larger, and by quite a bit too. That being said though, I do want to point out that with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, while next to the Celero 5G Plus, it honestly looks tiny. I will say in real life, when you're actually using this phone, it's really not that small. In fact, a 6.4-inch display is pretty normal, but still, with this phone, it's not like the display is super small, and honestly, if you're consuming a lot of content or doing something like reading, you're still gonna get a decent experience here. That being said though, with the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus, obviously with a much larger display, if you are someone who typically prefers to have a larger display, maybe you're consuming lots of content and that's really the main thing you're doing with your phone, or maybe you're playing games or something like that, in that kind of situation, it can be helpful to have a really large display like this. But on the other hand, obviously, with a display like this, it might be a bit more inconvenient to put in your pocket and stuff, so it really just depends on your preferences. If you are someone who prefers a larger display, then again, obviously, the Celero 5G Plus will be a much better choice. But if you don't really care about the display size, or maybe you prefer something a bit more compact, then in that case, you might want to go with the A33 5G instead. In addition to this, despite both phones having really good image quality, with the Super AMOLED versus an IPS LCD, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G does have a slight advantage, because with this phone with the Super AMOLED, the colors tend to be a bit nicer. As you can probably tell, the display is a lot brighter, and the viewing angles are quite a bit better. So if you're like outside in the sun, for example, the A33 5G is going to be quite a bit easier to see. But aside from those differences, both phones do have really good displays for what they are, so definitely no bad choices here. Now for storage, both phones are getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion too, so definitely plenty of storage. For the average user, you probably won't even need a microSD card, and even if you do have a lot of apps and games and stuff like that, again, 128GB is definitely a good amount of storage. Obviously not as much as 256, but again, for most people, you're most likely not going to need more storage than this. For security features, both phones have fingerprint scanners. With the Celero 5G Plus, it's right here on the power key. And with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we got it in the display. And in addition to this, the A33 5G does have Face Unlock, but the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus doesn't. But starting with the Celero, let's give the fingerprint scanners a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the A33 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, it does have Face Unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. But with the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus, again, this phone does not have Face Unlock. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Celero 5G Plus, up front, we got a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here, but considering this is more of an entry-level carrier branded phone, I wasn't really expecting it anyway. With the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, up front, we get a water drop notch for the selfie camera, not quite as nice and premium looking as a hole punch in my opinion, but it's still at least decent. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. And then for video, this phone can record 4K videos in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely nice to see. Now honestly, in pretty much every way, the A33 5G definitely has the better camera here. First of all, the features are a bit better, despite having an ultra wide camera, which I definitely do appreciate. The Celero doesn't have a macro camera, which, although I feel like a macro camera isn't really that useful anyway, it still is a feature most phones in general have. Regardless of the price range at this point in 2023, there are really not that many phones that aren't like flagship phones that don't have macro cameras. cameras. So because of that, the A33 5G has a bit of an advantage. It also can record 4K videos, which again the Celero can't do. And overall, with the A33 5G, the photo quality honestly is significantly better. To give you an idea of what these cameras can do, here's some side-by-side photo samples. So again, as you can probably tell here, the A33 5G just has significantly better photo quality. So on one hand, while the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus is really not terrible, and it will work if you want to take the occasional decent photo every now and then, I feel like if you're really taking a lot of pictures, especially for something like social media for example, where you might want things to look a bit nicer, the A33 5G is just going to be a better choice in pretty much every way. So in general, if the camera is a bit more important to you, while again the Celero 5G Plus is at least acceptable for what it is, for the camera the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is a much better choice in pretty much every way. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. With the A33 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM here as well, with the Samsung Exynos 1280. So in general, between these two, when it comes to overall performance, you're really not going to see a significant difference. But I will say, both phones are decently fast for what they are. Now first of all, I do want to remind you, these are not high-end devices by any means. So if you compare these phones to something like a Google Pixel phone or a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE or something like that, they're not going to be near that level, but at the same time, for more affordable devices, I do think the performance is pretty decent here. If you're doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, watching videos, maybe listening to music, or playing a few more simple games, for that kind of use, either phone will be perfectly fine. So for the things you're probably going to be using your phone for anyway, with either phone here, you will get a pretty good experience. Now I did run a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So as you can see, again, there's not really a significant difference here. On one hand, the Celero scored a bit higher on the multi-core score, and on the other hand, the Samsung scored a bit higher on the single-core score, but honestly, when you're actually using the phones, again, you're really not going to notice it that much. So either way, if you get either phone, you're pretty much going to have the same experience as far as performance goes. But again, for more basic activities and more moderate use, I would say either phone here will get the job done. Now for the batteries, both phones here have 5000 mAh batteries, with the Celero 5G Plus supporting 15W fast charging and the A33 5G supporting 25. So when it comes to charging speed, there's a bit of a difference here, but it's not really insane. But of course, if charging speed is a bit more important to you, the A33 5G will have an advantage. On the other hand though, the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus does have wireless charging, which for a phone that's not a flagship phone is definitely not a feature you see every day. So on one hand, while I don't think this is a reason to choose one phone over the other, it is definitely a nice added benefit. But as far as everything else goes, both phones here have great batteries. With a 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get great battery life and longevity here. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still have to use your phone all day, then in that case, either phone here will be a great choice. And down the road, as the batteries degrade, which of course all batteries do, with these phones having much larger batteries, you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly as a much smaller battery. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time without having to replace it, then either phone here will be great for that too. For the software, with the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus, unfortunately this phone only has Android 12, and considering it's a lower end carrier branded phone, I'm also not really expecting it to get any kind of major updates. So if you do get this phone, you will have to be okay with pretty much being stuck on Android 12. That being said though, I know a lot of people don't really care that much about the software, so if that is you, then most likely this really won't be a big deal. This phone does have Android 13, and with this phone, I'm also expecting it to get Android 14, 15, and 16. So in general, if software and software support is important to you, then between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is the clear choice here. When it comes to other features, like I already mentioned before, the Celero 5G Plus again does support wireless charging, so if you want that feature, definitely keep this in mind. But in addition to this, both phones here also do have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, either phone here can use that feature no problem. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now, in a lot of ways, these phones are really so close that I would almost say just go with whichever one you can get for a better deal. Because when it comes to stuff like the display, performance, battery, storage, and just general features overall, while sure these phones are a little bit different, I feel like in the grand scheme of things, if you're really looking for an affordable 5G phone, they're really gonna do pretty much the same thing. So if you can get the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus for like under $100, which I have seen it go on sale for, then honestly I would just get this phone, because sure, while the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G does have some advantages, it's definitely not worth paying a couple $100s more for. That being said though, if you do want a significantly better camera and maybe you want want to record 4K videos, or maybe having the latest version of Android at all times is really important to you, then in that case, I would go with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, but otherwise, considering the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus is most likely always going to be cheaper, I would personally go with this phone because even though the A33 5G again does have some advantages, at the end of the day, there's really not a whole lot it can do that the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus can't. But this concludes my comparison between the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus and the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.